everyone, welcome to UX Design and Wine, where I sit down with UX designers and product leaders over a glass of wine or two, and we chat all things UX and how they got into the industry and their advice as product professionals in the tech world. So they share the good, the bad, the ugly. I'm thrilled to have the lovely Lindsey Greer on the show today. Lindsey has been working for the last year in product design at a cool software company called Awardco. And before that, she was previously a designer, a creative designer and a product designer for Verb Technology while in school. And she recently graduated from Utah Valley University with a degree in web design and development. So I'm looking forward to chatting with her about breaking into UX, what she learned from being a UX intern, and also how designing for social media and marketing and UX all overlap. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me today. So to start, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been up to the last year working in product design for Awardco?
Yes, so this May I actually graduated with my bachelor's degree in interaction design from Utah Valley University. And right after that, I was able to do a full-time internship with Awardco here in Utah. And they're a recognitions platform. So pretty much as far as company culture goes, you really can't get any better than that. Like, it's so positive and uplifting. And I got to work, they have 6 UX designers there, and they're all on cross-functional teams. So I was kind of doing like an independent project that had to do with like onboarding and stuff like that within the product department. But I got to have a hand in things like contributing to our design system, attending certain meetings. I even got to step in for one of the designers while he was on paternity leave, and kind of like work on his cross-functional team in his place. And so definitely a lot of learning experiences, a lot of networking, but it felt so good to be done with school finally and like into the real world a little bit. So
yeah, what was that experience joining a company, an existing UX team as a UX intern? Like, was there anything really surprising about that whole process?
Yeah, actually I have like 2 thoughts on this. So it was a really gradual transition just because I was so used to doing full-time school and either full-time work or part-time work. So like used to being really, really busy all the time, and then just being able to focus like on an 8-hour work day. Like, you go to work, you do UX design, and then you get to come home and not do anything. I really loved that part of it. I also, as I was learning and working with the designers and the tech leads and the developers, I feel like it was a lot easier than I was anticipating it would be, just because I have anxiety and I have really bad imposter syndrome. And so I constantly think, yeah.
I think a lot of designers do.
Yeah, it comes with the territory for sure. And I constantly was thinking like, I'm not good enough for this. Like, this is going to be so hard. But as I was like working with the designers, I think I just was overthinking it in my head, because I was like, oh, this is really not as hard as I was anticipating it to be. And I don't know, maybe I was just lucky and I was blessed to be on a team with like really great designers who are so willing to share and teach. So those are probably my biggest takeaways from it. Just like, it was a lot easier and it was a lot more gradual because it was just work and not work and school and balancing like a ton of different things.
Got it. Well, I'm sure that's really encouraging for people watching, that it was easier than you thought, right?
Yeah.
And you felt, I'm guessing, kind of supported as you were onboarded and trained. Yep. How did that factor into, succeeding in your role, having that existing team to onboard you?
Oh yeah, it was everything. Like, I don't think I would have had the experience I did. It wouldn't have been as positive had I not had all of the support that I needed. I'm a pretty autonomous person, and I feel like as I was interviewing for jobs before this internship too, it was kind of expected that you would be able to figure it out on your own. I think a lot of it is just being resourceful. And so when I started there, it felt like I had like 6 or 7 mentors around me that I could just constantly go and ask questions and talk their ears off of like, tell me everything that you know, like, what can I take away from this? So I got to be almost like a sponge, just kind of like looking at how all of these other junior, senior, associate designers do their work and approach that and like their design process, and take little bits and pieces and apply that to how I do things. So it was just, I was so grateful to have all of those people around me. Like even the work environment that we were in, it's really open. And so I feel like it promotes that kind of like collaboration, and they kind of want you to like be able to go up to anybody's desk and ask them a question. So I think that helped as well. But
great. And for people who are watching who maybe aren't familiar with what cross-functional teams means, can you explain a little bit about what it's like being a UX designer working in that type of format?
Yes. So basically, traditional teams would be made up of like, you would have a team of just UX designers or a team of just developers. But in a cross-functional team, you kind of get one of everything. So it's like a mixture. Like you have a 1 or 2 or 3 UX designers, you have a tech lead, a project manager or a product manager, back-end developers, front-end developers, QA developers. You just have a lot going on. So and there's a lot of different meetings that you attend where you can kind of discuss things and present things, but they're a lot more efficient, I feel like. It's also just really nice to get to know the developers and things, because as a designer, I think it's important to know how things are going to be working so that you can keep that in mind when you design solutions or whatever it is you're designing, to know how that's going to be functioning on the back end or the front end. So yeah, let me think if there's anything else I'm missing within like a cross-functional team. I feel like that's the gist of it, is like it's just kind of made up of different parts of those jobs.
And how was it collaborating with developers? Because I know that when I talk to other, people that are newer in UX, I feel like that's a common thing they mention. It's that they're worried about the collaboration with developers. They're going to, give a smooth handoff. They're going to give enough information without being too much information. That type of thing. So, what did you learn in terms of that designer to developer handoff?
Yeah, that can be really tricky. I think it's really about communicating and keeping that line of communication open. And people are just so different. And I feel like when you have a lot of different personalities, it kind of just depends. But one really helpful thing that we did at AwardCo, we meet frequently as UX designers. We would have at least 2 meetings a week where just the UX designers were getting together and sharing knowledge, sharing Figma tips, sharing what we're working on, getting feedback. But sometimes we would pull in like a developer. For instance, we had one of our, I think he's a tech lead, but he also has done more like front-end development. And we had him show us like, when a developer hands you a Figma file, how do you use that and incorporate that and build that? So getting insight from a developer on like, so they're the things that we look at. It's really nice when you guys lay it out this way. Just giving that heads up of like, oh, when we hand off our designs, this is how they're approaching that, to just keep in mind to maybe make that process a little more smooth or better, or provide them more information. But I think just always being able to have that contact with them and like knowing what's going to be best to hand off, what they need from you, and vice versa. But yeah, it can be tricky. I feel like I'm pretty introverted, but I can be extroverted when I have to be. But being able to just like go up and talk to people and be able to communicate your ideas and your thoughts to somebody like a developer. But I think just even having a developer sit down on your meeting and just give their side of it is really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, just being, plucking up the courage to actually communicate and ask, is this working for you?
Yeah.
Is there a format that could be better? I feel like that usually goes over well with developers, even if it's intimidated, right? They're willing to give some feedback and help you out, especially if you're newer. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you were using Figma, is that right? What other tools were you using?
So I initially started when I was at Verb, we were using Sketch. And so that's how I kind of learned. I had a really awesome supervisor that I'd never used Sketch before. He kind of told me like, years ago we were using Photoshop. Now we all use Sketch. And this would have been in 2016. So a few years ago. And so I learned on Sketch. I learned all the shortcuts there. But I mean, it was a nightmare trying to like collaborate on files with Sketch. I remember that, like, kind of, uploading your folder to the box and being like, don't overwrite it, like things like that. But
Yeah.
as I've been in school, I know a lot of people used Sketch or Adobe XD or Figma. And so when I went to Awardco, they all used Figma. And they were like, no, Figma's so great. You got to learn Figma. And I knew I needed to learn Figma. And I'm so glad I did, and I'm still learning it. But it's amazing. I think it's definitely the skill you have to know is just how to learn programs, because it might switch from Figma to something else in the future. You never know. So I think just being able, rather than knowing Sketch really well or one program really, really well, just knowing how to learn the programs to be really efficient, just depending on what software your company uses, if they want to switch softwares, maybe changing your workflow. But I think, so those are, Sketch and Figma are the two main ones that I've worked with. So.
Okay. Nice. I know it's constantly evolving in terms of the tools that are out there and the latest and greatest. So I think that's a great point. We have to have kind of a mindset of being willing to, stay up with the trends and stay up with the latest tools. And sometimes that does come with a steep learning curve. But the good thing is they're getting better and better. So it just makes our jobs even easier. It makes that handoff to developers even easier and smoother. So that's cool.
I love that. Yes, that's so true. Especially in UX design, it's so funny. Because I feel like as designers, we know what we want, and Figma being created by these designers gives that to us. And so that's so fun to see. I love that.
Absolutely. So did you always know that you wanted to get into product design or UX design?
I've always loved digital media. In high school, I did what's called a concurrent enrollment class. So I was able to get college credits from Utah Valley University while I was in high school for digital media. And when I decided that I was going to go to college at Utah Valley University, and I told them I want to do digital media, they said, oh, we're actually splitting that major into two parts. So you have the development side, or you have the user experience side. And I was like, what is that? I've never heard of that in my life. And she kind of explained it to me, and I really liked the sound of that. And so I was like, cool, that sounds like what I want to do. So I just got set up in those classes. So that's kind of how I started in it. But the background of digital media, I'd always loved that in high school and junior high, doing that kind of artsy creative stuff digitally. And so I'm really lucky in the case that I got to start at a university that was offering that in 2015. And kind of go through it there. So definitely feel very lucky. It kind of just stumbled into it. But
yeah, it's crazy that now more and more universities are offering actual degrees in UX design or similar interaction design or HCI, which is awesome, because up until recently it really was that there weren't that many that were offering it. So you had to either do self-taught approaches or do online courses or boot camps. So what's your take on UX boot camps and kind of online certifications?
Yeah, I just had this conversation because I was at my job 2 weeks ago, and I literally just asked one of our tech leads about this topic, because I have a friend that right now she's taking a UI UX boot camp. And I've had friends and colleagues and coworkers in the past that have done boot camps. So it's been so fascinating to see. And I think the more I've thought about it, I think it just comes down to the person taking whichever it is, college or a boot camp. And I know I have to say, going to a university that offers this degree, not everybody has access to that. And so a boot camp is a good alternative if you don't have access to something like that. However, I will say, going to a college to get this degree, I feel like I had a lot more slack, and I was offered a lot more resources and guidance over the course of 4 or 5 years that I was there. I got to know a lot of people. I got to network with a lot of people, having that advantage of professors that know people in the industry. And in Utah, I feel like the design community is really close knit, and everybody knows everybody, and everyone's taken a class from this teacher. But with my friends that have done the boot camp, I feel like it's been the case of they've had an associate's degree, but they want to get into UX, so they do a boot camp. but yeah, it's just different for everybody. And my husband did a boot camp for like development, and I think it's a good like refresher, or if you already have an interest and you kind of know what you're getting yourself into and you're ready to be in a really fast-paced environment and like take that on, then it's a great alternative. I don't know, I think there's pros and cons to both, and if you don't have access or the means to go to a university, then a boot camp is a great option. So, but I personally haven't done a boot camp. So I'm just speaking from my experience going to university. I feel like they had so many resources and things for us while we were there. So,
and in a 4-year or 4 or 5 year capacity, you also have more time, right? Like you can build a portfolio more, slower pace, whereas bootcamp, you really are kind of thrown into the deep end. But it is an amazing resource. I didn't personally go through a bootcamp either, but I've hired quite a few people who have gone to bootcamp. So I think there's no right way to get into UX. I think either works. I agree. It kind of comes down to the person, and it really comes down a lot to the portfolio. Which I think is kind of the single most important thing when getting hired.
True.
So I know you had mentioned you were working on expanding your portfolio. What's some kind of advice for those who are just starting to build theirs, or?
Oh man, I feel like everybody I talk to about a portfolio, they're like not really happy with their portfolio, and I feel like as designers we're just critical on ourselves. But I think it's just a matter of doing it, putting out there whatever it is. It can always be fixed. It can always be touched up, and you can always revise. But as I've thought of like how I want to redo, because I mean, what I did through school versus what I've done even in the past 2 years is so different. And I'm like, I need to redo my portfolio so it shows better of like who I am and how I approach design, and a little bit more about me personally. And so I've had a few ideas of how I want to make it just a more personal experience when I, tell somebody, look at my portfolio, that they can really get a feel for who I am and where I come from and the experience I've had, and not just like, here's a case study of this design component I did, but like I really want it to speak to who I am. So I see so many posts on LinkedIn like, case studies are boring, do it this way, and it stressed me out so bad. I'm like, I don't have anything to show for it because I'm so nervous about doing it wrong, when in reality, I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. I think just put out what you have, and you can always go back and revise it. You can always build upon it. But I think just having something there is always good. But I definitely think we're so critical of ourselves as designers, and like, don't look at my portfolio, it's bad, I need to redo it.
I know, or until it's fully done, but it's like it's really hard to get to that point because it's always evolving, always getting better. So always kind of a cycle of iterating on the portfolio. So totally agree. And I know previously, before Awardco, you worked at Verb Technology, and you were a product design and a creative designer. What were the differences between being like a creative designer working on some of the social media and marketing materials versus product designer and working on the websites and products, and where did it differ and where did it overlap?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I started there on product design, and I was learning Sketch, and I was working on these projects. And as they expanded as a company, that's kind of when they kind of split up their product design group. And so I feel like it's more UI focused in terms of like being the creative design team, because we focused a lot on like a rebrand and the colors and the digital and versus print and the marketing and stuff. And I think it is important to be involved in that. And like, if it comes to, UX designers and graphic designers and they're not on the same team, I think it's still so important to communicate and share assets. I just think overall for the consistency of the brand and everything like that. But I think in terms of working on the product, you need to know what product you're selling and how you're selling it, and kind of the ins and outs of the marketing and the sales, in order to kind of help you as a designer while you're working on the product and you're working on these features. So I think that is kind of where I feel like it overlaps, in terms of like, you need to share assets and you need to be on the same page and make sure it's consistent and things like that. But it is, creating a social media post for a brand is so much different than working in a design system. Like they're very different. And I think that people think like, oh, graphic designer is the same as UX designer, is the same as UI designer, is the same as a product designer. And it's definitely not the case. Like, I think there is a lot of overlap, but there is so many differences within each of those categories. Like, it's just UX is like this huge umbrella, and I would throw graphic design in there just because I do think it requires, you need to know design principles and things like that, but
definitely
lots of overlap. Yeah.
And which is your favorite part of it then? Like, do you like more the interaction design side or more the UI side?
I think I like the interaction, just like design part of it more, like how things are functioning, like how can we improve this experience for this person in particular, and making sure that things are accessible, like accessibility. When I was at UVU, I did another internship there in the Office of Teaching and Learning. So I got to work with accessibility services, and that just like opened my eyes up to a lot. And I'm really passionate about that because I just feel like design and things should be accessible to people. And so I love thinking really like through a lot of things in the whole process and like the design system and everything. I had so much fun like working on that and being a part of the design system and prototyping things out and like just contributing to that as a whole and knowing how it all fits together and works together. Like, that to me was the most fun part of it. And I know that can get pretty UI heavy in terms of like, you have this button, how is this button gonna look? And it can be so nitty gritty and like the details of it all. Yeah. It can be overwhelming to think about. So, but I love it. I love just really thinking through like how things are working and functioning and how we can improve on certain things, whether that be like, how can we make the pagination better for you so that you're not having to click through a million pages to do your job, things like that. I love that.
Very nice. And you brought up a good point. Accessibility is becoming increasingly important, or it's always been important, but I think there's been a greater push in recent years to really prioritize that and make that kind of standard that you have to design in accessible ways. And so maybe for someone who's newer to UX and is a little intimidated by the thought of making sure that all their designs are also meeting accessibility guidelines, what are some simple things that designers can do to have a heavier lean on accessibility and make sure that they're at least on the right track with that?
Yeah, I think knowing where you can go test your designs, making sure they're accessible. I think there's a few different websites where you can go do that. But in terms of like, something that sticks out to me from when I was at UVU was, and this is just something that's really small that I just have always thought about in terms of like making sure that when you're making things and you want to differentiate between two items, whether it's like, let's say you have an app where it's a movie theater app and there's seats that you want to select, and how do you show an empty seat versus a filled seat? You have to make sure that you're doing at least two differentiating factors. So like, not just one is green and one is blue, because if somebody's colorblind, how would they know the difference between that? So just little things like that of like, okay, maybe it's a difference of color, but also this circle is filled and this circle isn't filled. Just keeping things in mind of like, if somebody can't read the screen, if somebody is colorblind, if someone needs the text to be larger, just there are so many things to think about. And I'm not an expert by any means, but I would like to be. I feel like that's something that I'm very passionate about. Because I feel like when I had the opportunity to take a class about accessibility, you learn that when you design for like the marginalized groups of people, it ends up benefiting the majority. And I just think that is so fascinating. And maybe that's why I love it so much, is because I'm like, yeah, you pay attention and you do the small things that make a big difference to maybe you might think it might be a small group of people, but then you come to find out that the majority benefit. So yeah, just making sure that you're running those tests, that you're asking those questions, and maybe talking to people who have those needs and doing user interviews with them and having them test your product and how you could make it better for them.
Yeah, that's a great way to kind of instantly get really an understanding versus just reading kind of guidelines online.
Yeah.
Actually talking to the users will help really bring, what you need to do and why it's important.
Yeah.
And then now that we're kind of nearing the end of 2022, What's a design trend that you think is going to be really big in 2023?
Oh my gosh.
Or a design trend that you want to go away in
Oh,
2023?
Mal, I have to really think about this one. I'm like, there's so many. Um, what? Give me your opinion first, and then maybe that can help spark
One of the
mine.
ones I really like, I mean, it's already big, but I think it's gonna kind of even get bigger in 2023 is a focus on micro interactions and
Mm,
animations kind of all
yes,
throughout the UI. I think we're all very much used to seeing that on marketing websites, kind of sales facing websites, but in-app kind of gamification and animations and micro interactions, I think really helps bring not only like a delightful and playful nature to the user experience, but also can make the actions of what you're doing clearer and more engaging and easier to understand. So that's kind of one that I think is
yeah.
going to get even bigger in 2023.
I totally agree with you. I love the micro interactions. I think it adds so much. I also think what we're going to probably see a lot of too next year and just continuing on the future is the augmented reality and the VR stuff like that. I actually took a class
Oh.
on VR, like virtual reality, and one of my capstone project was we were working with the Facebook Horizons workrooms and things like that, and I feel like we are going to see a lot more design go that way. And because I feel like I'm seeing it a lot more in terms of like if you go to Ulta or Sephora, you have the AR and it can show you how the makeup is going to look on you. And I remember seeing that kind of started a few years ago when you go shop online for glasses and you would like upload the picture of your face, but now you can like put on a filter and it would show you how things look on you. And I think, yeah, in terms of AR and VR, we're going to see a lot more of that. But that also raises the question of accessibility in my mind, because I had a lot of those questions when we were working with like the Oculus and things like that, of just how accessible is this going to be. So hopefully we see more accessibility with that in the future. But
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. I think VR and that type of thing it really can transform even little experiences, like you said, buying makeup, buying clothes, right? It kind of can transform it, and
yeah,
I think it's really exciting. So it's going to be interesting to see how we as UX designers can kind of keep up with that technology and how we can incorporate it into some of our existing designs and moving forward. So I think that's a great one.
yeah, it is crazy. It blows my mind every time. Even Amazon, like, see how this is going to look in your room. Like, this is so crazy. This is so wild, but
I
so
know.
fun.
It really is. What's good is design and technology are always evolving. So I feel like there's always really cool new stuff that's coming out and progressing. So I think it makes one of the reasons why I love kind of the UX UI field of design and technology is it is constantly improving and evolving. Never
It is.
boring.
Yes, it's true. And I feel like, but it always still follows the same kind of core principles, which it's always fun to tie it back to that. Because like the possibilities are endless, but if you have a core understanding of like those design principles, I feel like you're going to do okay. And you're going to be really able to understand and have a lot of fun with it. Just like knowing those kind of like base standard of like what is good design, even though that's so subjective. But I think there is still kind of like a set standard. But yeah, the possibilities are endless. Who knows what we'll see next year? Could be something that doesn't even exist yet, but
I know, it's wild. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was great chatting with you and hearing your journey to UX, and I'm looking forward to seeing how you continue thriving in your UX career.
Me too. It'll be interesting to see what next year has in store for me. But thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you. I love talking design. So this was so fun and so out of my comfort zone, but you were so fun to talk to. So thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it. No, thank
Yeah.
you. That was really fun.